Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in the Politico pub. Paul is in the spirit already with a pint in hand, which is what we like to see.
It's zero alcohol.
Oh, well, still,
Maybe.
it's good.
No, it's not.
My name is John Johnston. I am Politico's London influence reporter and delighted to be running this session looking at Rachel Reeves' speech, which finished not too long ago. To do that, we have Paul Nowak, General Secretary of the TUC, and Rain Newton-Smith from the CBI. Just to sort of kick things off, what was your sort of main impression from Reeves' speech? There was a lot of politics. There wasn't a lot of policy. Do you think she sort of got the tone right?
I think for me it was a confident speech. I think Paul and I were both there. And when you're at a party conference, she's mainly there to speak to the party members. And I think she delivered it well. I think from a business point of view, what they would have been interested in is, I think, the focus around the energy transition, around really, we need to invest in nuclear as part of that. We need to be creating good, clean, green jobs. I think there were some elements about how it's important to be close to Europe in terms of our trading relationship. Some interesting and important stuff on youth mobility, so young people from here being able to work and study in the EU and vice versa. I think some of those, that was a sort of welcome signal. And ultimately, I think she was trying to say, look, we need to have a stable macro outlook. We need to have stable public finances, fiscal stability, and trying to get her party around that as well. And I think that stability business will welcome. Of course, what they will be watching out for is all eyes are on the budget. I don't think we expected to see announcements today on tax and spending, but that's what business will be, looking ahead with some trepidation.
Paul, you said not that long ago that Labour needs to do a bit more so that people feel the agenda, that it's not just a slogan.
Yeah.
Do you think that what Rachel Reeves said today sort of does any of that, or do you think there's still very much this sort of focus on the agenda and people aren't actually getting to grips with
Well, just going back to the point that Rain finished on, I mean, this was never going to be about a lot of policy, was it? Because the Chancellor doesn't get the opportunity to get up at a party conference and talk about policy. That's what a budget's for, and that's what spending reviews are for. So expect to see more substance in November. I said going into conference that it was important that Labour showed whose side they were on, and showed they were on the side of working class people, their families and communities. And I think Rachel set that out very clearly today. So she talked a lot about good unionised jobs, really important for us. She talked about employment rights. She talked about UK jobs and UK supply chains, whether that's in steel or shipbuilding or manufacturing, really important. The things that really matter to people directly are those breakfast clubs that do make a difference to kids, but also to parents who are going out to work. And then some big ticket things for us, like a youth jobs guarantee, really important. None of us want 1 million young people out of work. And so active support to get those young people into work, education or training, really important. So from my point of view, I mean, there is obviously some big things that people would have been wanting and looking for, things like the two-child benefit cap. Maybe that comes as we get closer towards a budget, but a step in the right direction and clearly setting out whose side the government is on, and a very clear counterpose to both the Tories and Reform.
You mentioned the Employment Rights Bill,
Yep.
which Rachel Reeves did mention, didn't say sort of too much on that. I mean, obviously you've been pressing really hard for the government to deliver that in full, especially after Angela Rayner's resignation. Do you think you've won?
I don't think it's a question of winning, John, but I think
Ray might disagree with you.
I think the government is going to absolutely implement the Employment Rights Bill and implement it in full. And I'm confident about that, never complacent. But I think you just have to see the reaction to those hostile amendments from the Lords. Week before last, the government voted down every single one of them. Now, once we've got the primary legislation, then we've got to get into the detail about, well, how's the probation period going to work? How are things like union rights to access workplaces going to work? And we'll continue to push our case hard on those issues and more. But it's really important, I think, in terms of the government delivering its commitments, its manifesto commitments to the British public. And it's really important in terms of electoral support as well. I mean, you might have seen the big spread in the Mirror today, Dale Vince's Giga poll, 45,000 adults, absolute support for every measure in the Employment Rights Bill, and the support is highest amongst those who are Labour to Reform switchers. So I think manifesto commitment, importance in terms of improving people's life at work, levelling the playing field for good employers and for the UK economy, but also electorally dynamite as well.
Have you been trying to get some progress on the Employment Rights Bill while you've been here, or do you think it's done
I
and
think
dusted?
from our point of view, no one has done it. You know, the government have a mandate to deliver the Employment Rights Bill. I think I think there's a few things. I think where we would want to see them really double down is on enforcement of existing rules. That no one is behind any employer who's not following the rules, and I think that is really important. I think on the other elements of the Employment Rights Bill, I think it's around having a workable probation period. I think everyone agrees that we need that. But the problem with the legislation as it's drafted is it's not clear how that would work in practice. And I think, you know, even other things around the end to 0 hours contracts, I think everyone agrees that once somebody has been working a certain set of hours for a period of time, they should be able to ask for an equivalent contract. But at the moment, some of the way in which the legislation is drafted is employers would have to write to their employees every time their hours shifted. And so it's about making sure it's proportionate to the outcome. The government have also said they want to reduce the overall regulatory burden on business by 25% over this Parliament. The Employment Rights Bill needs to be included in that we need to make sure that it's proportionate to the outcome we're trying to achieve. So I think there's a lot, you know, I think there's a lot of common aims behind it, but I think we just have some real question marks about how it's being delivered at the moment. And I think particularly if you look, and I do think the things that the Chancellor announced today around the youth guarantee, everyone agrees that 1 million people young people out of work is a huge challenge. And I think, you know, getting people who've been out of work for 18 months back into work is a huge opportunity. But that's going to take businesses making that decision to take a risk on someone who's been out of work for a long period of time. They won't have the same skills. So how we can support them finding those skills and taking a risk. And the challenge at the moment is some of the Employment Rights Bill feels like it's pulling in the other direction in terms of creating those opportunities. So I think there's a common ground, and I think there's a consensus that will last the time, not just over the next 5 years, but for decades to come. But it's going to take finding that compromise and that areas of consensus so we can really deliver it.
It's probably not worthwhile, John, me and Rain going through every aspect of the Employment Rights Bill, because I suspect we'll be in violent disagreements on some points. Yeah, but maybe just to make this overarching point, a Diet Coke version or a zero alcohol version of the Employment Rights Bill is not going to cut it in workplaces. And things like 0 hours contracts, saying to a low-paid, insecure worker that you've got the right to request a 0 hours contract really doesn't reflect the imbalance of power in workplaces. That's why we think it's a duty on employers to provide a guaranteed hours contract. There are lots of points of detail like that we'll have to go through, but if the government is serious about delivering the spirit and the ambition of the Employment Rights Bill and the broader Make Work Pay agenda, as well as the letter of the law, then it needs to be something that people can feel in their workplaces, because if they don't feel that change, that'll be a big disappointment to millions of people. You know, for example, on things like sick pay from day one. So they've got to deliver it in spirit as well as in the letter of the law.
Both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have sort of been doing this Del Boy routine of no income tax, no VAT rises, and then Darren Jones has come out straight after her speech and sort of muddied the waters on that a little bit. I mean, do you think for businesses there's still this sort of problem of it's not clear what levers are going to be pulled in the budget, and is that creating sort of frustration or worry about what's to come?
I think there is still uncertainty as to how some of the decisions will be taken at budget. I think businesses can live with some of that. I think everyone recognises that you only get those decisions on tax and spend at a budget. I think what they want to see is when those decisions are taken, it's really taken with that view of how do we create growth, how do we create jobs, how do we make it easier for businesses to invest and invest now, because that's where the growth will come from. That's how we fund our public services. So I think that's where they want to, and I think the challenge the Chancellor faces is through some of those commitments, she's restricted herself on 75% of the tax base. I think what we would like to see is looking at it more holistically and say, how do I deliver growth? How do I deliver reform that's really going to deliver higher living standards over time, rather than feeling boxed into some of those decisions and feeling that you have to fill it through things that could be more distortionary.
I mean, before the election, Labour sort of said they were going to do all of their plans in partnership with business. Rachel Reeves said today that it's the central economic objective of the government is to reduce the burden on business. Are you finding it easy to engage with the government on these points? Do you find that the conversation is open? Are they listening to what business has to say about the agenda, or is it a bit more closed off than you might have been expecting?
No, I think this government, as in previous governments, are happy to listen. They're happy to sit down. Of course, the challenge, as with all, there are some areas where you feel you're making more progress than in other areas, and I think with this government, one of the things that businesses are really saying is they're making some bold choices on planning and infrastructure. They've said they want to get more homes built. They've said they're really behind how we move our economy to a low carbon economy and get that energy transition happening. That means we need to see much quicker decisions being made on planning, and for the moment, businesses aren't seeing that speed of delivery happening.
I was going to ask, because I know that you were calling for a wealth tax to be looked at. The Chancellor this morning has kind of ruled that out in some ways. Are you frustrated by that, or do you think there's still sort of movement to be made?
I mean, what we've been calling for is a serious grown-up conversation about tax, and not just a wealth tax, but taxes on wealth, and taxes also on exceptional profits. So, and again, this is incredibly popular with the public, particularly reform to Labour or Labour to reform switches. But whether it's an actual wealth tax, whether it's further to go on equalising capital gains tax with income tax, whether it's a tax on the windfall profits of the banks. I mean, the big four banks between them made £46 billion in profits last year. They're the sort of profits that the energy companies were making when the Tories introduced a windfall tax on the energy companies. And obviously, Gordon Brown and others are on the record about more effective taxes on online gaming. I mean, whichever way you cut it, the Chancellor's going to have to find, depending on which figures you read, somewhere between 20 and 30 billion pounds. And our overriding principle is, well, two. One is that the government needs to stay the course in terms of investments in public services and investments in infrastructure. But if it's going to raise taxes, it has to raise ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay a fairer share. So we're absolutely in that space. I mean, what the detail looks like, I'm not going to I mean, the Chancellor will have to take those decisions, John. I think there's a broader issue, actually, as well, though, about the role of the OBR. And this is a difficult one for the government to talk about, because you don't want to be seen to be criticising the OBR because the OBR is not giving you the headroom that you need. But it is crazy when you've got a government who's invested a 10-year infrastructure plan, trying to desperately rejuvenate our energy system, our transport system, to effectively mark its homework every 6 months and change the amount of fiscal headroom the government has got is really difficult. So I think there's a longer term conversation actually about how are we pricing some of the impacts of those investments, because ultimately we all want growth in the economy. We want growth that is felt in people's pockets, so that living standards are going up, not just bald GDP figures. But at the moment, the approach it's very difficult. The OBR knocks you down 0.1% on productivity, and you've got to find another £10 billion, and that cuts against long-term decision making.
Rain, you've already said that the government should give up on the spending restrictions that they've sort of put in place for themselves. I mean, they seem wedded to it for the moment. I think Darren Jones said those remain in place today, but decisions haven't been taken ahead of the budget. I mean, do you think they've sort of gone too far in making such a big deal about this being a manifesto commitment that it's going to be very difficult for them to walk back from it if they feel they have to do that because of the black hole they're facing?
I always think it's best to give yourself as much space, as much room to manoeuvre, much room to react to events as they unfold, but be really clear about what is your vision, what are you trying to deliver. And I think this government have been clear. They say they really want to deliver that growth mission. Well, that is going to happen by businesses deciding to invest and create jobs in the UK, and that includes our international competitiveness. So we need businesses from around the world deciding that the UK is the place they want to invest, whether that's in the life sciences industry, whether that's in our universities, whether that's our creative industries. And that is about having a stable tax base. So I think it would be wise for them to just give themselves a bit more room for manoeuvre.
I think we have about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to take some questions. Stick your hand up. We've got a mic going around.
Come on, there's no such thing as a free pint. You've got to put your hands up.
All right, have a think. The one other thing I wanted to ask about is digital IDs, which not mentioned in Reeves's speech. I mean, do you think that's something that the business community would be sort of welcoming in terms of how they check whether people are responsible and able to sort of work in the UK?
I think the issue at the moment is businesses do have to check whether people have the right to work or not. If this is just a way of making that easier for businesses to do those checks, I think people could get behind that. If this is part about how each of us as citizens can access public services and using digital ways of making it easier, things like the NHS app, when that's used and rolled out across the country and used effectively, that makes it easier for people to access NHS services. I think where businesses are less sure is, if this is more about a broader political point around immigration, then I don't think businesses are necessarily behind that. They want the UK to be open to talent from around the world, and I think it was quite welcome to hear the Chancellor today talk about those who have the right to remain to be able to work and contribute to our economy.
I mean, I think from our perspective, that we'll need to see the detail. The government has set out that there'll be a proper, open and genuine consultation. I think that's something our unions will want to engage in. There are lots of concerns, privacy and security concerns, concerns about those who are digitally excluded at the moment, concerns about those, think back to the Windrush generation, people who'd lived and worked in the UK for decades but didn't have the documentation to say that they could live and work in the UK. So there are all sorts of things that you would want to avoid. That said, I think it's an idea worth exploring, and it speaks to a point that Ray made before. There are lots of reasons why people come in small boats to the UK. Sometimes it's an absence of safe and legal routes. Sometimes it is easier because it's easier to work in the grey and the black economy. I'm always mindful there are dodgy employers, not the vast majority of RAIN's members, dodgy employers who are employing those people. We often talk about illegal workers and we don't focus on the people who are employing them. But if you had digital IDs alongside a strong framework of employment law, alongside proper enforcement, the role of the new Fair Work Agency, that hopefully drives out some of that behaviour. There is a real danger that actually what you do is drive it even further underground, and you don't want that unintended consequence as well. But I think we need to look at it in more detail. And frankly, the debate has moved on from where it was 10 or 15 years ago. We all give. I'm looking for my phone, but I left it in my bag. But Apple and Google have got more information. Tesco's club card has probably got more information about me than the government will ever collect. So there are safeguards you need to put in place, but it's certainly something I think we're open to engaging on at least.
Right, I'm going to have one last go. Any questions? Hey, there we go. One.
It's mainly one for Paul. So in terms of reform, how much engagement have you seen from the party, whether that's councillors, any elected representatives, or members in terms of the trade union movement? Because obviously Labour's losing a lot of votes to reform. Are you seeing kind of a bit more trade union action there as well?
Yeah, and the reality is, out of those millions of people who voted for reform in the local elections and in the general election last year, there will be some union members as well. Maybe give you a practical example. I was in County Durham last week, which obviously Reform now run the council. Lots of concerns flagged by the union reps in the council. Most of it is atmospheric and presentational at the moment in terms of Reform actually driving through. I take with a pinch of salt their claims what they'll do to local government pensions, but clearly in terms of requiring staff to work in the office 5 days a week, the language around roles that might be related to diversity, equality and inclusion, for example, problematic. It's actually been quite a recruiting sergeant for unions in those reform-led councils, where people have joined unions because they're worried about the competence of those reform councillors have never run anything before, now in charge of tens of millions of pounds worth of local authority budgets. I mean, I think we've got a big job with our members to engage them about the gap between what reform say and what reform do. The Employment Rights Bill is a classic example where Farage says he's on the side of working people and then votes against the Employment Rights Bill at every opportunity. He stood up in Scunthorpe with Save Our Steel literature from the steel unions and then rides on the coattails of Donald Trump, and we know his destructive tariffs, the impact that would have on UK steel and other key UK industries. But I don't see our job at the TUC as lecturing union members about you were wrong to vote reform, and certainly not to write off those members as racists or bigots. I think the vast majority of people who voted reform will be decent, fair-minded people who feel they've been let down by mainstream politics. And this does go back a little bit to what I said before about the Employment Rights Bill, and maybe even the point about tax. People are disillusioned with mainstream politics, and they want politicians to deliver the promises that they make in elections, and that's why delivering those manifesto commitments, whether it's on employment rights or indeed on tax, is really important in terms of people keeping faith with the political process.
I'm getting the nod, so I think we're out of time. So just to say thank you so much all for coming. We have a little gap now, so please stay and drink all our free booze. And at 3 o'clock, we've got Martin Lewis, money-saving expert, here for a panel. So thank you very much. Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.